You are now live.
Okay, we are live. This is Senate Finance, and this is April 1st. And we are going to be walking through H159. Can somebody hit the gun button? Can you get it? Randy's got it? Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Oh, but that's a touch screen. I think so.
Yeah. Found that out when we were asking Faith to go live and realized that the room was muted. Okay, so we're going to walk through this bill. It takes 4 attorneys to walk through this one. So, it's a Michael special. So we're going to start. I'm the attorneys. I've got everybody here. Who's going to start on this one? I'll just leave it up to you to do the section by section.
I should go first since my sections are the first one.
Okay, good. And Senator Bray and Senator McDonald, you have soft copies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Faith.
Thank you, Faith.
Okay.
So good afternoon, David Hall, Legislative Council. We should be working on H159 as recommended by Senate Economic Development. Should I share my screen or what's best for you all?
It might be better to share your screen. Then we're all kind of looking in the same direction.
Okay. I have to pull that up. Okay, is everybody seeing draft 9.1?
Yes, make it a little bigger.
Mine is passed by the House. Oh, same thing.
Oh, wait, did you make changes in economic development?
This requires a short explanation.
Okay,
159, as passed by the House last year, was their comprehensive omnibus economic development bill. For reasons I can't even remember, there was like 20 sections, 19 of those sections got incorporated into other bills, mostly into the budget. There was one innocuous section that was left. And we ran up to the deadline of crossover. We were either going to ask for an extension or we could put more economic development bill on the House passed bill. And Pro Tem told us to put it on the House passed bill. It would take 150 months. So there's nothing really that you need to look at. Each one for it's a blank slate.
got it. Okay, and this is what economic development, Senate Economic Development has done. Okay, unfortunately, you have a better title than we got for S53. All right, David, we've got the logistics worked out. Hopefully being in person will stop some of these crazy bill logistics that have been going on for at least this past year.
Oh, I feel like that's the only thing that stayed the same.
Okay.
As you'll see, section 1 is a purpose section. And the purpose of this thing is to address the negative impacts of COVID on everybody. Section 2 is a tweak to the program for new relocating employee incentives. This is within ACCD. So this program is existing and codified. This is the program that has a $5,000 base grant for qualifying people who move to the state, $7,500 if you're in a hard hit area. The changes are here in C3, telling the agency to adopt procedures to initially approve an applicant after verifying eligibility, and then final payment after they actually make the move. So that's a timing issue to make sure we're incentivizing people, qualifying them before, paying them after. And then the next piece, the next change is on page 4 here, one of the main criteria that was limiting in this program was the occupation which the person was entering in the state had to be one listed in this Department of Labor publication. And this obviously strikes that out so that it is no longer limited to one of those positions. Any questions?
Yeah. Are they limited to any position? They can work anywhere and get this?
There's no limitation in this statute on the type of job that they take.
Limitations on the earnings. It can't be a very low paying job.
That,
Can it be a low paying job?
It can't be a very low paying job.
Could it be a very high paying job?
It could be. This section, if I may, Madam Chair,
Yes,
this section was sort
I
of.
think, Michael, if you look, it's hard to hear you sometimes.
Okay, yeah, I'm having trouble hearing David. This section that we're striking was forced upon us by the House. And it turns out from the program operation over the last year, it has sort of backfired, and a lot of people who would have qualified, that would have been good paying jobs and come to the state of Vermont were barred from doing that. And so the administration came back and said, they also, with the House, had suggested this language, and they said, we made a mistake, so they weren't removed.
Okay,
well, they
So-
weren't barred from coming to Vermont. They were just barred from getting this money.
Correct.
Yeah.
Because occupation with the most openings, that's been the problem.
That was the problem they had. According to the administration, they had a bunch of people who were very good candidates for this program who couldn't qualify, they had to say no to. And then in hindsight, they said that hurt the program.
It's probably hard pressed to find occupations that have too few potential applicants at this point, given the shortage.
And I think that, if I remember correctly, cashiers was the thing that the administration wanted to open. They were like high on the list of most needed things, and no cashiers applied to come under the program, so they weren't really achieving their goal.
So you're testifying that nobody wanted to move here in order to become a cashier?
Well, cashiers, it was statistically one of the
I know,
lowest paid
maybe
occupations.
that's really good for remote work. Or, you know.
yeah, well, this is for remote work, working from home, so you could be a cashier remotely.
It's both. If you remember, the program started out as a remote worker program,
Yeah,
but it got
okay,
expanded to a relocated worker program, so you could work for Vermont businesses as well.
okay,
You didn't have to work for an out-of-state business.
You were one step above for shelf stockers in the large groups of Vermonters that got paid rinky-dink wages about 4 years ago.
How much money you're putting into this program? I know we haven't gotten to the
So-
appropriation.
so it's in there. It's in there.
It's in there.
$7.5 million?
The government
God.
proposed that we went along with $1 million in the base and $5 million in one time.
I'm not a fan of this program. I hate this program. I'm sorry, Michael. I know you love this program. I really just have many better things we could do with $7.5 million.
okay, let's keep walking through.
What else you got?
Okay,
All right. The next section, section 3, the Think Vermont Regional Recruitment and Relocation Network. I'm not sure we have to read through the gory details considering how many sections you have to go through today, but this is basically a multi-year marketing program through Department of Tourism and Marketing, where they're going to do RFPs and work with partners in 12 regions throughout the state to promote, businesses, worker relocation, economic development, tourism. I think it's an $8.6 million appropriation over a couple of years.
We cut it in half. 4.2.
Aha.
Okay, and this is one-time money,
Yeah, one-time ARPA money.
ARPA money?
Well, actually, no, I don't know if it's ARPA money, but it's one-time money, yes.
Is the
Okay,
program only imagined to run the year, or we're gonna do?
2 years. It says it,
One-time money.
yeah, it says it in the bill, 2 years.
Everybody good?
okay, so I'm, tourism and marketing. All right, but this is to set up a network around the country to help
State.
encourage people. All I can say is, my husband went to a family reunion and family members from Texas had heard about this original program, the ones that were just getting out of college, so it did get us an awful lot of PR.
A huge amount, it's something else, it's between $1 and $2 million of earned media. Yeah, that we got as a result of that. We got nationwide coverage, and then other states began copying us.
Oh, well, so but this would just set up the recruiting kind of tool, all right. Okay, let's keep going, David.
Okay, let's see. That brings us to section 4, the Capital Investment Grant Program, which you adopted last year in the budget bill as part of the economic development package. And this program, you may remember, had a $10.58 million appropriation. It runs to the Agency of Commerce. It's designed to be sort of the last dollars in for these regional projects that are ARPA funded, ARPA eligible. You'll see that's the addition of language here, just specifying that these projects have to comply with the final rule promulgated by the Treasury. The changes here lower the dollar value of awards through the program, so that now would be the lesser of $1 million or 20% of the total project cost, which is the cap for the grant for a project. One big change is that this removes data modeling about the net fiscal impact of a project, which used to be part of the cap structure and ended up being part of the review process. So that comes out, and instead the way it will flow is, the limits will be based on project cost or dollar value, and will be consistent with guidelines that the agency has to develop in coordination with JFO and approved by JFC. This piece here requires publication of data about who gets money, project description, etc. And then these implementation pieces here are that part about agency working to collaboratively with JFO to get guidelines up and running. Any questions on that one?
I'm gonna ask the Ruth question, and I'm disturbed she didn't find it.
Just don't cry, Ann.
I won't cry. Line 14 on page 10. You cross out publicly traded and then add in publicly traded company.
Which page is this?
So it's like inland marine.
Yeah.
It's a 10.
Page 10.
This is following on the inland marine discussion from yesterday.
I think that what you can't see because of the strike through, it masks that publicly traded was hyphenated in the underlying statute, and now it's not hyphenated.
Yes, so.
We're crossing out a hyphen.
Okay.
Whoever reports this must say that on the floor.
Okay, that answers that question. Yeah, you're right. If I look really closely, there is a hyphen there. Okay.
Good catching up.
All right. Any questions about capital investment program?
It's just a grant program, basically, right?
It is.
Yeah, okay.
Is there any limit on what they can do with it?
Well, yes. I mean, the limits are on the dollar value. They have to attract business or retain business or create jobs. It has to be consistent with regional plans. They have to have worked with other partners to leverage additional dollars. But as far as like the type of business that it would go to, that is not limited. There is discretion for them to establish, priority for particular sectors. You'll see here if they can demonstrate that a particular sector has suffered sort of above average harm relative to other industries.
Okay,
Can I answer that question?
Yeah.
Jim? So the department would have you believe that there are significant restrictions in the COVID guidelines of how you could spend this money.
yes,
But we wanted to put more guardrails on it, and it gets very much into the weeds. So what we did is, David, did you go through the implementation section? We said that they had to, in establishing the detailed guidelines, they had to work with the Joint Fiscal Office and present it to the Joint Fiscal Committee for approval. So that's another layer of guardrails about how this money can be used.
okay.
That's the legislature involved.
I just remember joint fiscal giving ACCD lots and lots of money. And there's been a lot of concern that lots of that money went to businesses that may have had a down month, but didn't.
I'm with you.
Yeah, and that, but how much, did we get an accounting for that?
The auditor is all over that.
Yeah.
There was no real performance audit, but he found, just like with the federal dollars, that getting the money out the door quickly, we had to sacrifice some of the targeting to do it. And, the PPP program on the federal level has been lambasted in terms
Yeah,
of
that was
how effective it's been. So that's why, at least I, as one member of the committee, wanted to keep the legislature somehow involved in getting the details of this program.
Okay. But that's this, how much additional money is this?
So the governor had proposed in two programs, he originally proposed $90 million. We only gave him $10 million last year. He
Okay,
came back and proposed $80 million between two programs this year. We gave him 40.
This is 10 for this one, right? 10.
This was 10 was last year. This is 40 more this year.
okay.
But you can get
Up to $1 million.
You can get up to $1 million. So what kind of, do you have any example, or did you hear good examples of transformational projects? Or that you could do with a grant of $1 million?
The program as it was originally established was supposed to be truly transformational, talking about the governor would want up to $3 million. That would have a big impact on a region. And the feds came down and said, that's really.
All right, this is capital T.
So now they're looking at smaller programs, and they complain, we had put restrictions on this thing about, it had to pay for itself, return for investment, and ComCavet was involved in every application, and we got rid of that, but we did preserve the Joint Fiscal Office being involved in setting up the program, and it's going to be smaller programs. They said they got a lot. It was oversubscribed to $10 million, and now it's smaller programs. They're talking about like building additions to daycare centers as they're getting applications for that. And it's capital needs, it's not operating needs.
That's not transformational either, okay.
No, they're admitting that
Yeah.
it's not transformational.
Small T.
Small T, it is for the families that need it. All right.
So, David, in section 4, help me understand this. The lead-in language, which is at the bottom of page 8, is just a bill that became law last year, and it has an appropriation, but that's sort of last year's appropriation, isn't it?
Yes.
So does that cost us to re-spend $10.5 million, or
No,
should I-
that's old law.
Okay, so where's the 40 million? Or is
There's
that in
an
a different
appropriation section, look further down.
There's a fiscal
I
note.
think it's at the, yeah, there is a fiscal one.
Okay.
I haven't found 40 million
I
either.
haven't either. It's not in this section.
I
Okay,
don't think it's in the section, I think it's in the
No,
appropriate.
it's
David
down.
can tell you.
Well, I asked him to tell me.
He said it's in the
It's
appropriation.
on page 64. Section
it's
15.
54. Okay, we'll do that when we get there.
Okay, sorry, Madam Chair, thanks.
No, I think we need to understand this. Okay. So as far as I can figure out, we're somewhere around page 12. Or are we past that?
We are at the bottom of 14.
Oh, okay.
Vita loans.
Vita short-term forgivable loans.
Right. So, you've had several rounds. You've had several rounds of economic recovery grant programs that have run through the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, the most recent iteration of which still has over $20 million of unused dollars in it. And this section 5 shifts the program and the focus to Vita. And rather than grants, it is forgivable loans. And Vita will run applicants through their typical underwriting process, determine COVID harm, and then come up with an amount for a forgivable loan. And if the business demonstrates that it has used the loan proceeds for an eligible purpose, that loan will be forgiven. And that is the simplest way I can tell you of what's going to move forward. Obviously, there's lots of details. I'm happy to go through those if you wish.
Okay, I assume Vita has agreed to this?
Yes.
Okay,
What,
yes.
how is it forgivable loan different than a grant? What am I missing?
It's not.
It's not.
So why isn't it called a grant? What,
Well, the only
What's going on?
the difference is, there's a little bit of an overlap because it's ARPA money, so it better be forgiven, otherwise it's going back to the feds and it's not gonna be allowable. But, so the loans will go out in two-year period, so it meets the ARPA deadline. And then Vita has to check that the money is used for the purposes of what it was intended, and if it is, then it's forgiven. But it's essentially, they do loans, they don't do grants, and this is the way they structure it. But effectively, I think for 99% of the people, it'll turn into a grant.
Remember the PPP things were similar.
This is the new federal thing.
I'm not saying it's tasteful, I'm just,
They couldn't get the money on a no interest loan and then go buy a car with it. They gotta demonstrate that they put it into their business for their intended purposes, and then, once they prove that, Vita will forgive the loan.
No Ferraris. That was one of the stories with the
Yeah.
PPP.
What did they do? What was it?
Guy bought a Ferrari,
yeah,
or several
I
Ferraris.
think that's right, yeah.
Yeah,
Can I ask you a question?
yes.
I don't know if this is for David or Michael, but I see or anybody, on page 17, paragraph G, this talks about priority sectors. When considering whether and how to prioritize economic sectors, that paragraph, the ACCD can designate priority set, but there's a list, but there's not a definition of how to determine that. It's just up to them.
There are sectors that are defined by some code, I can't remember the name. Because we had an issue with this when we did the lodging, the lodging.
Yes,
restaurant
so
thing.
we left out the
We left
wedding
out the tent-
photographers.
left out the tent companies, and one group sector got 100% of their need, and another got 47% of their need. It really mattered whether you were in the sector or not.
Yeah,
They had something to point to where.
It's a federal tax sector.
okay, so there are guidelines.
Yes.
Okay, and do the capital investment grants in the previous section also have similar language? about
Same
priority?
language.
Same language, okay.
I'm just trying to remember from last year. in programs like this where there are forgivable loans, how do we deal with covering the tax issue for the businesses? Because I know we exempted them from having to pay taxes on those. And there's nothing.
There was an issue, I remember
Yeah.
that.
I just don't remember how we dealt with it. There's no mention of that here in this bill. So I'm wondering if something else covers that.
I think the grants are taxable, but you raise a good question if it has a different name.
Yeah.
Because loans are not taxable.
Correct.
Okay,
Right, but when you make it a forgivable loan and they wind up getting the money as free money, there's a tax issue unless it's somehow specifically waived.
Yeah.
And I just don't remember how we dealt with it.
I think we've taxed them. I think they were taxable.
I'm trying to remember, it was the double, part of it was the exclusion. You could, normally, you get a grant, you hire people, and then the taxes are paid on the wages. And when we came out and said that it wasn't taxable, we on our side were concerned that there was a double dipping into the exemption.
Yeah.
And then we waived it, the feds waived it. There was a whole confusion in Washington.
Yes.
And then we on the state level waived it as well as taxable.
Yeah, that
Yeah, I just
is,
don't know how it's handled in this
That was
particular case here.
okay, so that's a good, we'll ask the tax department. So we will ask someone from over there to just tell us if there's any tax implications. And these are for the forgivable loans, right?
You might as well ask for the grants too.
Let's ask for all of it.
Really, I think we really need to understand that.
Okay,
It was very
it's
confusing.
easier to
last
find
year.
it out now than April
Yeah,
1st,
right.
or this is April.
This is April 1st.
Next April 1st or January, when they were still changing the tax codes last year. Okay, let's keep going. We've got that one.
Okay, well,
now we're getting
happily,
into our
that's
area,
it
yes.
for me for now.
But before we lose you, David, I'm sure if I could.
Yes,
So can you just punch us through page 15 there? A business has to prove some kind of economic harm, right?
Yep.
And that's been a subject, of a lot of back and forth, let's say, can you just help me understand what this all means?
Yep.
Revenue.
So basically, Vita is going to establish a baseline value for your revenues and your expenses. And typically that would be 2019, but there is some flexibility built in for them to use a different period if they feel like it would be appropriate to establish what is basically an average year on what your revenues and expenses would look like. And then they're going to measure that against your 2020 and 2021 revenues and expenses and figure out what your net adjusted net operating income is, 19 relative to 20 and 21. And if you have suffered at least a 25% reduction in your adjusted NOI, you are in the program. And what you actually get for a loan amount will be limited by three things. Let me say that part of the benefit of the Vita underwriting program in determining revenues and expenses is, they'll have the flexibility to factor out things like extraordinary items, non-cash expenses, so that they're not counting, for instance, if you had some big fire and had to spend a lot of money to renovate your structure or something like that, they're going to be able to look at all those details. But you'll see here on the max loan, if you're in the program, if you've suffered that 25% NOI reduction, then you will get a loan award, and that is limited to the lesser of a $200,000 hard cap, 6 months of eligible fixed costs, let me pause for a second there, or the amount of your cumulative decline in adjusted net operating income during COVID. So there was a lot of discussion about whether 6 months of fixed costs was appropriate for every business. Not all businesses have, so many fixed costs if they're a software business or something like that. So there is some discretion, there's some flexibility here for VITA to use a different figure pursuant to guidelines that are approved by JFC if they feel like 6 months of fixed costs is not the appropriate limiter here. But at any rate, the amount of the loan, again, will be subject to one of these caps, subject to the guidelines, subject to the 25% NOI reduction, and then well, that's it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. But just this morning, I was hearing from beekeepers in Senate Ag who have had record die-offs for any number of reasons we don't have to get in here, but that has nothing to do with COVID. Would they be eligible here? I mean, they've had losses. I guess I'm seeing due to the COVID health emergency, but there's a lot of qualifiers there. So it all has to be demonstratable to have been impacted by COVID.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all of these programs that are ARPA funded are, are subject to the final rule under the ARPA statute, and that says that the harm has to have been caused by COVID, that there has to be a response that is the remedy is responsive to the harm caused, that it's proportional in relation to the harm caused by COVID. So that's definitely layered upon all of this. But you'll see here in C1, the economic harm can be demonstrated a number of ways, but it has to be the results, a material decline that results from COVID-19.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, David, my concern is the measurement period. We had a lot of hassles on joint fiscal. When the list of the original grantors, the guys that got the money came out, it was, I think, like April of 19 versus April of 20. And if your revenues were less in 20, that difference is what your loss was determined to be. ACCD said, well, they couldn't really figure out, if you laid off employees and you weren't paying salary. And then for others, there were accounting firms whose revenue was less, but we'd also push back tax deadlines, and some feeling that, if we looked at a longer period, some of those folks might find that their revenues were back up. And is there a control over, and then ACCD told us they couldn't target small businesses. And a month later, they came back and asked for more money to do small businesses, at which point it was like December 31st, and it had already been determined that any money that hadn't gone out the door was going through the budgeting process. But I don't think joint fiscal was ever really comfortable with the joint fiscal committee with the granularity or the precision with which all those grants went out, or the ability, we were never clear, because at one point we were told, no, they couldn't target, we wanted to do like small downtown retail. They told us they couldn't do that, and then a month later, it was their idea to do that. And I just want to make sure that we're looking at the period of time we're looking at. I'm trusting that VITA will figure out if, if you've cut your expenses, that is figured in, that we'll be looking at nets rather than gross. But again, that period of time, because there was a time when everybody was shut down. And so numbers were really low then, but then some places really made it up afterwards.
I'll give you a short answer that agrees with you. I tried to make that argument initially and lost, but in the last two rounds, we now have it as net operating income.
Okay.
Because the ACCD wanted to came in the first round and said, just whatever you lost in revenue is the amount of your grant. I said, well, what about all the costs they say?
Yeah.
If you're a restaurant, you don't have employees, you don't have food costs. Why should you get every dollar back? But they said, we gotta get the money out the door. We gotta get the money out the door.
Well, that was the argument last time.
Right,
And
but
now we've got the auditor saying,
But we definitely improved it here.
okay. I just want to make sure that we aren't comparing it, that we aren't figuring in just the 2 months that they were shut down, that we get a long enough period of time to measure, so we pick up when they went back up.
It's annual here. It's the
Okay.
219 versus 20 and 21.
Okay, that sounds better. All right. Okay,
All right, how about Becky, do you want to share your screen?
Yes, I was gonna suggest if you want, I can do that.
yes.
Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I have the next few sections that deal with TIFs, both the current TIF district statutes, as well as creating a new project-based TIF program. This committee has seen this language, I think, a couple times before. So I just wanted to ask your direction on sort of the level of detail that you want me to go through with it. But I can just start off and you can let me know if you want more or less detail. So Section 6 of the bill is amending current law with respect to the tax increment financing district. So this is not the project-based TIFs. And this is more of a technical change here. On the top of page 18, it is updating the list of TIF districts that are authorized in statute to reflect the addition of Bennington and Montpelier. Section 7 is also making changes.
I'm sorry, Becky, you said this is just old-fashioned TIF, not project-based TIF, but
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
all under a heading.
Old fashioned, yeah.
But it's all under the heading of project-based TIFs. Is that a
Yeah, I was just noticing that maybe this should just be changed to tax increment financing to be more accurate.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so Section 7 of the bill is also making some changes to the I'll just call them the old-fashioned TIF districts. So if you go to page 19, what is being added here in subdivision 2 is clarifying that a municipality that has a TIF district and also has a tax stabilization agreement in place, that the municipality, that for that municipality, the municipal and education property tax increment for the properties in the TIF district have to be calculated on the assessed value of the properties and not the stabilized value of those properties.
We did this last year, right?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I think this committee has actually seen this language a couple of times because it's been in your committee in I think a few different bills. So yeah, so this should be hopefully somewhat familiar to you. The next change is also making, I would say more clarifying changes in the TIF district statutes. So on page 20, lines 4 and then 16 is updating the number of additional TIF districts that can be approved. So a few years ago, the General Assembly decided that there would be not more than 6 more districts approved that could be approved. And since Bennington and Montpelier have since been approved, this is changing that to, from 6 to 4 and clarifying in on lines 20 and 21 that only 1 more district can be approved in both Bennington and Washington County because those were where those 2 other districts have since been approved.
Okay, and Becky, I don't know if you were watching the other day when Montpelier came in with its TIF issue.
I heard that they were in. I have not yet.
Okay, we've got the auditor coming in next week. We sent it over, but basically they haven't done anything. But they're doing a reappraisal, and what they're asking is to have that reappraisal, to restart it, make those reappraised values the base. That the TIF district, that the subsequent background growth would be based on, which sounded like it would benefit the ed fund because they'd be getting paid on the improved value, but we'll hear what the auditor has to say and then see what you think about it. But this
Okay, yeah, and I have that
time. Okay, and I guess they are unique at this point, but we might make it a general statement. Okay.
Okay, so on page 21, this language here is saying that in any year where the assessed value of a property in a district actually decreases in comparison to the original taxable value that was set for the property in that district, the municipality always still has to pay the amount equal to the tax calculated for that original taxable value to the ed fund, not based on the decreased amount.
This was, we tore down the building or we have a big hole.
Exactly.
Yeah, or something burnt and that, okay.
Okay, the next change is in the project criteria for the TIF districts. So there should be 3 out of 5 criteria that are met. And one of these criteria is that the project will affect the remediation and redevelopment of a brownfield located within the district. And this is adding some language that says in the case of a brownfield, VEPC is authorized to adopt rules to clarify what is meant by a reasonable improvement to remediate and stimulate the development or redevelopment in that district. Okay. So section 8 of the bill is creating the
No, it's not a TIF for brownfields.
Well, if there's a brownfield in the district.
If there's a brownfield in the district. We're not doing a TIF to clean up brownfields.
Like brownfields mentioned.
Well, they were already mentioned, and this makes it a little clearer.
Yeah, that is current law, and this is just adding the ability for VEPC to adopt a rule about what is meant by a reasonable improvement.
And wasn't, no, St. Albans was they put dirt down that was better than the dirt that was there. But if you were starting your project and you found out there was some contaminated soil, this would allow Betsy to have rules for what was allowable to count as a TIF expense, right?
Yes, I think this did stem from the situation in St. Albans where there was a moving of old dirt for new dirt, I think.
Yeah.
And I think it was not clear that the requirement of, yes, if it was an improvement as defined under the TIF statutes, if it met that definition to sort of, I don't exactly recall what they did.
Okay, we'll have brownfields. We'll have Betsy in to talk to us.
There's brown, and then there's really brown.
There's really brown. Okay, we passed this last year. I think we just.
Madam Chair, there are a lot of things that I missed when I did this.
Okay.
I had a question about the 6 districts. More districts are authorized?
No.
So a few years ago, the General Assembly had capped the number of new TIF districts that could be approved. And that was 6 at the time. Since that legislation was enacted, 2 of those 6 spots have been taken up. So the statute is now changed to reflect the fact that there's only 4 spots up for grabs.
It's not for new,
Not for new, just for
It's
remaining.
only the 4 remaining. They subtracted 2 from 6. And you get 4. And that's what you've got.
So we're not talking about additional.
No,
Correct.
this is not 8th grade, this is the 7th.
We'll make sure I get that right. You subtract 2 from 6. Most of the time you get 4.
Most of the time you get
Got that.
Okay,
Can I ask?
yes, please.
Maybe it's Becky or Michael. This language we passed last year, is the next section is the mini TIFs? Is that also the stuff we passed?
My understanding of what I asked for here is this is exactly the Senate Finance language.
Okay, and what happened to it? Why is it stalled over in the House somewhere?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the Ways and Means.
We did pass it out of here?
What's
We
that?
did.
Yeah, I believe this is all the language that you passed out in S33, which is, I guess, currently in Ways and Means right now.
The chair of Ways and Means is not as fond of TIFs as the chair of Finance.
I see.
They don't all have the municipalities.
Well, as I recall, the chair.
So this, oh, sorry.
I did not want the mini TIFs. So anyway, we're gonna keep going.
We are punchy, Becky, I'm sorry.
It's Friday afternoon, and this is a lot more fun than banking and insurance was yesterday.
I don't know,
Well,
inland marine insurance is really
Inland
exciting.
Marine. We're still struggling with inland marine. So anyway, but
So
this,
for this next section, for the mini TIFs or the project-based TIFs, as you mentioned, you did pass this out last year, and there's a lot of language here. A lot of it is just setting up the construct that you have for the TIF district model and statute and creating that for the mini TIF pilot program. So I don't know how much detail you want me to go into, but essentially what this is doing is creating a 5-year pilot program that uses that TIF district model for smaller scale development projects. So from January 1st, 2023 to the end of 2027, VEPC is authorized to approve up to 4 project-based TIFs, and there can't be more than 1 per municipality. And I'll just show you in the language that the definition of project here caps the total debt ceiling, including related costs and principal and interest payments of not more than $5 million. So that's sort of the scale of the type of projects that can be approved under this pilot program. And other than that, there's a lot of the same sort of definitions that you have in place for the TIF districts, and the same sort of reporting requirements, and having to separate apart the increment to help pay for these improvements. So I don't know what's helpful for me to go through all of this language, or just specifically this definition of project here.
So, Senator Pearson.
Could you, last year or whatever it was, I feel like we've done this a few times. We had, no more than 3 a year or something. I can't remember, but can you just talk to us about, just reorient me to that one, please?
Yes. So, and actually I noticed that this was a mistake here, so this has to be cleaned up. But on page 26, subsection B, the pilot program is created from January 1st, 2023 and ends on December 31st, 2027. And VEPC is authorized to approve a total of not more than 4 TIF projects, provided that there shall not be more than 1 project per municipality.
All right, thank you.
So it's 4 total over the
Yeah.
40-year period? Is that what we voted out of here?
Right, once a year.
Yeah, I remember we did that because it said originally not more than 3 projects per year.
I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, I believe when it first came out of Senate Economic Development last year, it was 10 projects with not more than 3 per year. And then in this committee, it was reduced to this amount.
I think that's how you got the chair's vote.
Right, I agree. I also think, I could be wrong mixing this up, but I think that we passed this in the biennium beforehand and it ran into problems with
Yes.
Ways and Means, and they were talking about doing a pilot project. So we, in anticipation of that opposition, we turned it into a pilot project and it got scaled back. But I think this passed the full Senate, and I know it passed this committee, and then it died. That's 33, right? That's the bill that's in Ways and Means now. Yep.
That's correct. Yes, and there was a bill, I don't remember the bill number, in the last biennium as well.
237, I think.
Yeah, we had one that was sitting on the calendar when we got sent home. And that had these technical corrections that had come out of the St. Albans audit that pointed out where there was some lack of clarity, including, and I'm assuming it went through somewhere else, that you could use bond money to pay the debt service on the bond until you actually build something. Yeah.
Yeah, so that language is in this bill as well.
And yeah. And
So
I
I can point you to that as well. There was some additional cleanup, I don't want to say cleanup, some additional changes that were made to the TIF district statutes that was raised, I think 2 years ago now. And some of those changes, I'll just show you, you incorporated into the definitions for the TIF projects as well. So for example, on line 16 here, it says improvements also means the funding of debt service interest payments for a period of up to 5 years, beginning on the date on which the first debt service is incurred. So that I think is what you were just referring to. And in the next section, I believe, is where you'll see that change also made in the TIF district statutes.
I think that bill was still sitting on the calendar when the first version of this bill came over, and we just put the changes to the general TIF statute onto it. So we got the whole thing cleaned up, only it isn't cleaned up yet. Because it was agreed to 3 years ago now, that the issues in St. Albans were general enough that in the statute was vague enough that we needed to put some clarification in it. And
That's correct.
How you got the chair's vote on this one, so.
Yeah, I believe it started out as two different bills and then it was combined. And then I'm trying to remember the reason. It might have just been because of COVID that it didn't go through. And then last year, S33 was passed out of your committee and is still in the House.
Okay.
So I can show you some of those other changes that you were just mentioning. So all of this language here.
Going, Becky, just keep walking us through the mini tips.
The mini tips, okay.
I'm getting sick flipping around.
Sorry. So the mini tips,
Movies like that.
I will. I think I skipped some of it.
The front seat of the car, so.
So the mini tips, the creation of the program is in subsection B. Subsection C authorizes allows a municipality to apply to VEPC for approval once it has received approval from its legislative body for this tax increment financing for a project. Subsection D sorry, was there a question?
No.
Okay, the eligibility requirements. So the project has to be located in one or more active designations approved by the Vermont Downtown Development Board or is located within an industrial park. The proposed infrastructure improvements and the projected development or redevelopment are compatible with confirmed municipal and regional development plans, and the project has clear local and regional significance for employment, housing, brownfield remediation, or transportation improvements. And then subdivision 2 says that a municipality that already has a TIF district is not also authorized to apply for a project under this section. So you can only have a project if you don't already have a district.
Becky, what page are you on?
This is page 27.
Okay. I'm ahead of you. All right, good.
The subsection E is the approval process about how VEPC will approve an application that's submitted. And this is similar to what review process VEPC takes into consideration for approving a TIF district. And then there are certain process requirements that are the same. The municipality has to hold public hearings and establish a project. There has to be a TIF project plan that includes a description of the project, a development financing plan, and all the sort of related financials that go along with it. On line 21, this is also similar to what's for TIF districts. The creation of the project occurs on April 1st of the calendar year that the municipal legislative body votes to approve the TIF financing plan, project plan. On page 29, subsection F sets forth how the municipality can incur indebtedness against revenues to provide funding for the improvements and related costs for this TIF project. And that is also similar to the process that's in place for TIF districts. One change that's different from TIF districts is in subdivision 2, which says that notwithstanding any provision of any municipal charter, the municipality is only required to have one vote to incur debt through one instance of borrowing to finance or otherwise pay for the TIF project improvement and related cost. However, they can present one or more subsequent authorization votes in the event a vote fails. And I think that this was trying to take into consideration the size of the project and that it's a 5-year pilot program. So that is why the one vote was added in here.
Senator Pearson.
Becky, am I right that currently municipality has to agree to set one up and then have a vote to get in debt? That's what you're saying is now a one-stop process?
Yeah, for TIF districts, the legislative body of the municipality has to approve it, and then they also have to have a vote to incur debt. I guess a municipality in other circumstances could have more than one vote to incur debt. And this is saying for a district, this is saying for those projects, you kind of only have one shot to incur that debt.
But why wouldn't we, like, there could be, well, what am I trying to ask? If you vote to incur $4 million of bonds, does the municipality then get to do that gradually? Like they can do 2 million to get started and then go back, take another million, and then
So this says that they can only have one authorizing vote to incur debt through one instance of borrowing. It does say if that vote fails, they can present it more on one or more subsequent authorizations. But I think the idea is that they have one instance of borrowing.
Because these are much smaller
Yeah.
projects. The one that was here was Westford, and they wanted to put in a septic.
out there is going, by the way, I think. All right.
Okay, we'll keep moving. 'Cause we're now behind time. Maybe after this section, we'll stop because we have that little thing with separating insurance markets.
That's coming back today?
Yeah,
Not on the,
wait, yeah, affecting health insurance.
that's for
Betsy
Tuesday.
Bishop, oh, I'm on Tuesday, I'm sorry. I have 3 things here running. Okay, then we're still good. No, we aren't.
Well, we're late, so.
We're late. We've got we thought we might actually get asylum seekers out today. So, yeah, so we'll finish this TIF section and then we'll have to put it off, and I apologize to whoever we've left hanging there. Okay, so.
Okay, subsection G requires that when the project is approved, that the original taxable value of the project is certified at the creation of the project, and each year to see if the taxable value of that property in the project area decreases or increases. Subsection H requires that a municipality has to hold apart their increment from the original taxable value, and requires that all property within the project is assessed for financing improvements and related costs. And the municipality has to remit to, sorry, I see there's another mistake here. The municipality has to remit not less than the aggregate original taxable value to the ed fund every year. And that is the same construct that is set up for TIF districts as well. So subdivision 3 says that all property taxes assessed within the project area have to be subject to the provisions of this section. So you can't have special assessments under a charter. Shall not be considered property taxes for the purpose of this section if the proceeds are used exclusively for operating expenses related to the properties within the project and not for improvements within that project area. Subsection I is how that tax increment can be used. For the amount of tax increment, for the property education property tax, the municipality may retain up to 70% of the increment for up to 20 years. Beginning when debt is incurred. For the municipal property taxes, they can use at least 85% beginning in the first year that debt is incurred.
Okay, Becky, I think we're gonna have to stop at this point.
Okay,
The length of the TIF is 5 years?
that's the length of the pilot program.
That's the length of it, but you're taking out a 20-year bond,
Yes,
right? But if Westford, since they came in and they were putting in a septic system, and they were saying if they had a municipal septic system, which the town couldn't afford to do, there weren't enough residents to do that system. But if they put in the system, there was a guy that wanted to open a restaurant or a general store, and they were sure all kinds of other good things would follow. But if other good things didn't follow, then the town that can't afford to pay for the system now is left to pay for the system, right? I mean, that's what happens in a regular TIF. The town is on the hook.
that's correct. They're only allowed to use a percentage of that education property tax increment for a certain number of years.
Right.
And they have available to them the municipal property tax increment as well. But the idea, I guess, in this case is that the private investment that would happen would increase the property values such that they would be able to take that value to pay for the improvement of the septic system.
And I think that's been my concern, is that when you're dealing in cities like Montpelier, Barry, St. Albans, they have city finance officers, they have a much larger pool of resources to draw from than when you're dealing with a small town with 3 select board members and maybe a part-time city manager. And my concern was that if the guy didn't build the restaurant and the value didn't increase, because these are much smaller projects, that the town that is now telling us they can't afford to pay for the bond would end up paying for the bond. And if I remember, Joan Goldstein had a story about her town built a municipal septic on a grant from probably the feds, maybe the state, many years ago. And that now the town is so small, they can't afford to do the mandated updates that we're putting in on septic plants. And that's, you know, because this is a pilot, but I want to make sure that we have enough disclosure in there so the towns will get that.
Yeah, so I think some of the answer to that is that what VEPSI does in reviewing these applications is making sure that there's a, you know, project development plan and financing plan, and they look at those expected revenues and that are coming in. So I think VEPSI might be able to speak to the analysis that they do to make sure that it will be able to pay for itself. There is in the language as well, you know, reporting requirements that they have. You know, I'll just show you in subsection K, there's reporting requirements that they have to abide by, and sort of annual auditing requirements to make sure that they kind of meet those
I think what I just want to make sure is before this gets started, that there is enough tax capacity in the town, since the argument has been there that the town can't afford to put in these sidewalks or can't afford, and these are small projects, so the risk that the restaurant that was gonna go in might not go in or might fail, is somewhat increased. And we'll talk to Betsy. But
Yeah, I
want
think that
to-
they would be able to,
They're on the hook.
I think that's part of their review process. So they would be able to explain what they do when they look at those
Okay.
questions.
So we'll have them in, and we'll stop at this point. Because I've got a whole bunch of other witnesses waiting to come in. So thank you, Becky.
Thank you.
And everyone else, yes, Becky's the only one left. So we are going to go on.
When you talk about TIFs, that's what happens.
You're right. Okay, so we're gonna go on to 461. I'm gonna try and get you out of here today. And this is an act relating to excluding the income of asylum seekers and refugees from household income. And this was the household income. We had our first walkthrough when we do the property taxes. And we're pretty rigid about anybody that's got an income in that household is considered able to pay into the maintenance of the household. That includes the taxes. And we have done some exclusions, I believe, for children, like college students who work in the summer, from that, if my memory is serving me correctly. But the first person I have on the list is Tracy Dolan. And there's Tracy. And stay hands-free, Tracy. And you're the State Refugee Office, Human Services. So talk to us, what problem are we solving here?
Sure. I'm not very familiar with how many people have run into this, but I'll just describe what I understand. So basically, when refugees come here, mostly they get placed right into long-term housing. But occasionally, for example, when the Afghans arrived last year, there's a need sometimes to place a refugee temporarily, sometimes for a few weeks or a couple of months, with a host family. That's one instance where we might have a refugee staying with a family and not in their own housing. Another example might be someone who's here seeking asylum. And again, not very often. I've talked to both refugee agencies. Neither of them have heard of any cases where it's been an issue with regard to property taxes, to the best of their knowledge. But occasionally someone who's seeking asylum might be in a situation where they're unable to work. And so they may be staying with someone long-term. I
was involved with a group with a family of asylum seekers in central Vermont. And they are banned from employment for 6 months after their application for asylum has been accepted. And it was a long process. You have to go to Boston. Somebody has to hire a specialized lawyer. So it was generally a year or more before they would be able to earn money. I suppose we might have some wealthy asylum seekers that had cash somewhere, but they have to be here probably at least a year before they can even start to earn money.
Yeah, usually there are some exceptions. Right now, the Afghans who are here, their status, they are actually asylum seekers as well, but they are able to work. But you're right. Usually if you're here as an asylum seeker, usually you probably wouldn't be working. So I guess my conclusion would be in the realm of where I work and my field, I would see this as not a particularly large scale problem that I'm aware of, where there are people, for example, refugees or asylees living with a family and contributing any income to that household.
Okay. So, any questions for Tracy? Senator Hardy.
Hi, Tracy. It's nice to see you. Since you don't know of any and you don't think this is a widespread problem, are you still supportive of the bill? Do you think we should move forward with it, or is it a problem that doesn't need a solution?
I can't say that I know the scope. I do know that because of what I think was just raised, a little bit of word got around. So I think a few families who might have otherwise been interested in hosting a refugee, for example, might have hesitated a little, thinking it somehow impacts them. So I think for the purposes of making sure that we have a population that would be willing to host if we needed them to, for refugees coming in, I would say that I would be supportive of it so that we can put it to bed and so people recognize that it's not going to impact them. Again, the refugee host situation tends to be temporary, but if that was any sort of concern for host families, then I think it would be great if we were able to take that concern out.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Maybe we could put a time limit on just.
Well, we're still going to be getting. I mean, it seems like there
No time limit on the amount of time you spend with the family before your income starts to get counted.
Oh, I see.
Okay.
What is the usual? So since how long do asylum seekers or refugees usually live with families?
Usually refugees don't live with host families at all. In Vermont, our practice is normally to put them right into long-term housing. However, occasionally we've used host families, and those can be up to a few months. I don't think we've normally gone past 2 or 3 months. In terms of asylum, we only have a handful of asylum seekers every year. So first of all, our N here is less than 10. I can't speak to how long they live with families. I'm not as familiar with their situation.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, any other questions? Thank you, Tracy. And I've got Hope Crifo from Central Vermont Refugee Action Network, but I know she was invited, but I don't see her up there, and that's too bad because I think they're probably the boots on the ground that are asking for this. So maybe we can send her another invite, Faith, or somebody that you'd like to send.
Will do.
Okay. We'll go on to Rebecca Samaroff, Tax Department. Okay, Rebecca, what's the tax department's take on this?
Sure. Rebecca Samaroff, Deputy Commissioner at the Department of Taxes, and we have no administrative concerns about this bill on our end, so all clear.
This is too easy. Let's go back to tips. Okay, any questions for Rebecca? All right, Abby. You've walked us through this, right? And this basically says if you're taking in a refugee family, any income they earn won't be counted against your household income when it comes to figuring your property taxes. And I think we've heard this is likely to be very limited. I might feel more comfortable if we put the 3-year limit, you know, for the first 3 years or 5 years. I can see we'll get some situation where this might become a permanent, you know, it works out, it becomes a permanent residence. And at some point, I think we need to say, no, you're living here. But other than that, yeah, I can see where people might be concerned that if I take them in and then and regular refugees could be earning income right away. Asylum seekers have some limits on them. Committee, what do you want to do with this?
Madam Chair, may I just address something that's in the language already as it's before you?
Yes,
Great. So for the record, Abby Shepherd, Office of Legislative Counsel, there is currently a limitation, but it's based on the individual's status. So depending on whether it would be an asylum seeker, an asylee, a humanitarian parolee, or a refugee, because those are the different statuses that are allowed this exclusion. They do have a limit as to when they become eligible to apply for permanent residency, which in the case of a refugee is within 1 year of arrival. For the other status, 3 statuses that are listed, that could potentially be up to 5 years or more.
okay, but so until the time that they're eligible for permanent residency.
Yes,
All right.
that's what the House did include because
Okay.
of that same concern about this continuing indefinitely. To note, I think that I emphasized this, but at this point it was a few weeks ago when I did the walkthrough. This could potentially apply to the homeowner themselves if one of these individuals had this status and did own the home, but that is probably unlikely to occur.
Yeah, well, we ought to be able to exclude the homeowner. Maybe the refugee marries the homeowner at some point. Okay, yeah, this would be, we don't want to do unrelated because you might have a cousin that's here that's, but the non-home owning, yeah, probably wouldn't happen. Because if you own the home,
Then you wouldn't be a refugee if you owned a home here.
well, you'd be a refugee who came with money. Okay, we'll think about that, but that's. All
I'm
right,
sure you're not voting on this right now, are you?
I'm not voting on this right now.
So I have to get pro temp, so it's at 3.
What is going on in the pro temp's office? Senator Bray is in the pro temp.
Oh, is he?
Whoa,
Not in my meeting.
I had to go to the
there.
principal's office this morning.
I don't know where he went.
I got a note from Bray. He asked to be in the pro temp's office. Oh no, at 2:45 in Ledge Council Street. So you're next. You see Pearson in the hall, tell him I
I'll
need
send
you
him, I'll
back.
shoot him in here.
Everybody's probably getting the same message I did, get your bills out by. Okay.
Well, is there language that you would suggest to prevent the person being the homeowner, or do you think that's necessary?
I suppose we could say unless the person had a financial interest in the, you know, when you get families that are taking in family members who are refugees, I almost think you can do more harm than good, given that if this happens once in Vermont, it would be an issue.
If refugees don't earn income, what is their account?
They do earn income.
Through subsidy for refugees?
No, asylum seekers have legal limits on when they can go to work. But if you're just a regular refugee, you can come in here and open a restaurant or go to work. You probably wouldn't be living with a family. The ones in the family we placed our refugee family with, that lasted 3 months, maybe, if that long. And they got housing, you know, individual housing. But they couldn't work for a good year, so they couldn't have any income. But if you're just a regular refugee, like you go through the process and you're here from England, or you wouldn't be a refugee, you'd be an immigrant.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you're a refugee from Ukraine and you come in. You can go to work, there's different, and you could work and be living with your aunt
Or with someone, a volunteer.
or a volunteer. And I think the concern is that when we are trying to place a large number of refugees, we did it with Bosnians, and now we're looking at a large number of Ukraine refugees, that host families might say no, because if they work, it's gonna raise my property taxes.
We mean, because they get bumped over the 90,000?
Maybe they're
I mean,
over
that's-
that, maybe
that's-
they're over that limit to start with. Maybe they've got an auxiliary apartment in the backyard. And rather than rent it for money,
Well, if the household income tosses it out of the pay based on household income, they're into higher.
yeah,
they
they're
pay
up
more
to
taxes.
98,000, what?
But if they're still under the 90,
It won't affect them.
well, it'll have the households folks will have to pay more, but you could get 2% of the new people living there's income that you could be.
Do we have
They
any
contributed-
indication that there's a problem?
Well, that's what I was hoping we could get Hope Crifbo, I think that's how you pronounce it. And I think we will try to get somebody, this is central Vermont. I know there's a very active refugee resettlement group down around Brattleboro.
Well, Tracy runs the state program.
The state program, but these are volunteer programs.
No, I know, but she knows the sort of
Yeah.
statewide perspective of how many people are here and everything.
So I'd like to, I don't know who asked for this bill.
It's Janet, Janet Ansel is the sponsor of the bill.
Okay,
It might be interesting.
we'll
to ask them,
have
you know,
Janet in.
Yeah,
Yeah, are we solving a problem that?
Because actually, I think my family moved to one of her towns. So,
Well, if technically
Janet's-
refugees work and you get bumped out of being able to pay based on income, that could be significant.
and also, I mean, what Tracy's point was that there might be the perception that it would be a problem, and so she
think
doesn't
that's
want to
what we
limit
need.
households.
yeah.
So
Senator Cummings,
doesn't.
Yes, Faith.
Hope has joined us.
Hope has joined us. Good. Hope is giving us hope. Hope, are you there? You're muted.
We did that up 2 weeks ago.
All right.
It's a pair.
Hope is here, but she's muted and we can't see her.
On the edge, it's at lower rate. Here we go.
There she is. Okay. Hope,
Yes,
yes, we are trying, welcome to Senate Finance. We're
thank
trying
you.
to figure out what problem we're solving here. It sounds like, well, at least for asylum seekers, I know it's a good year before they can even think about getting any job. But then refugees can work just about immediately. And we're trying to see what problem are you seeing on the ground that needs to be solved?
Okay. Well, we do have a number of asylum seekers actually in the state who have managed to get their work authorization. And when they live with a host family, for example, their income from their job after they start working could theoretically be considered part of the income of their host family, which obviously it is not. Does that help?
Well, except that if you have a child who earns income and lives with you, college student, we exempt a certain amount, I believe, but it is part of household income.
Well, the asylum seekers' income is generally, quite low.
Yes,
And it goes directly to the asylum seeker, not for food or for anything else, which would
right,
help the host family.
right. But is there anything that says if the asylum seeker's been there and has a job that they don't pay rent?
Generally, under the host family situation, they may pay rent or they may not pay rent, or it might be that the sponsoring organizations such as Central Vermont Refugee Action Network or CASP down in Brattleboro or Rutland Welcomes will pay the host family something. But it's totally separate
But
from what.
okay, so if you're paying them, that will count as income
Yeah.
for the host family. If the asylum seekers are paying them, the question is, because this is a much broader category. We've included, when we wrote this law, all the money of the people in the house, because that is the money that is available to pay the property tax on the house that you're all living in. And I guess we're trying to understand, is this a huge problem? Is this just people are more concerned? Because we'd have to boost the family's income over $90,000.
Yeah, it is. I'm sorry.
Difference. I mean, if your family is, if even with the income of the refugee, it would have to get the household income over 90,000 before it had any impact, because you're limited. You pay based on your income. But yeah, that would have, but still it would, because it would be the income in the family. You'd be paying based on the bigger income as a percentage, so you would pay more.
On the household.
Yes, you would pay more, even under 90. So Senator Pearson has a question.
Yeah, my question, I think, is first for Abby and then for Hope. Abby, no matter how it's being paid, if a host family is getting rent, that's part of their income, right?
Yes,
So
yes, that's correct.
that's a level playing field, seems to me. And Hope, I'm assuming the risk is that people won't want to be host families because they're already, donating this to the community, I think, by and large, right?
That's correct.
And so in addition to offering up some space, if we give them effectively a significant property tax increase, if they happen to trigger, this seems straightforward to me. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Abby, how much, we do put a cap on college students or adult children? Yeah.
Yes, so may I interject with a few of the types of income that I think you're talking about and that are at play with these different individuals in the household? As you mentioned, there is an exclusion for the first $6,500 of income earned by a full-time student who qualifies as a dependent. There is also an exclusion for gifts received under $6,500. But if a gift was received by a member of the household over $6,500, which it sounds like that might be a possibility for these individuals, that would be considered household income. Additionally, any cash public assistance and relief is also considered household income that the household members have access to pay their property taxes. So it's really the cash public assistance and any gifts above $6,500, as well as wages. Those are the types of income that this bill would exclude. So that would be helping the household exclude the amount of income received by the asylees or refugees. Also to note is that not all of the types of statuses that are being helped by this bill are even able to receive wages immediately. I think your discussion did get at that distinction, but some of these individuals will not be receiving any wages until they're able to get a social security number. So that could be up to a year or more.
Okay, so if we excluded, I had 7,000 in my brain, but I was close. If we excluded the first $6,500, as we do with dependent children, we could add and refugee and asylum seekers in there, which means that you could come in and earn some money before it started to be taxed, because people do, I know, you know, the volunteer groups are pretty good about getting a car, or, you know, there's transportation. There's a lot that goes into getting these families supported and accustomed and clothed in Vermont clothes, and then finding housing. But we don't want to discourage. What I'm thinking is all we need is somebody to come in with a big bank account somewhere, and, you know, they're here, they're not working because they're an asylum seeker, but they've got a lot of cash stashed away somewhere, and it'll just hurt the whole program.
But why would a family like that need to live? This is only for a host family.
Yes, but we could not release the name, the country of origin. Some of these asylum seekers are in hiding. And everything was on a need to know basis, and the group I was working with. So you might be here as a refugee and not wanting anyone to know who you are or where you came from or if you have money.
Right.
So I want to make sure that I get in trouble for saying guardrails, but that I don't think it's going to happen. But I also remember the guys with the rebate check sitting on their porch in front of their condo in Stowe, and the state was paying their property taxes.
Well, maybe Hope could tell us, like, do people live with host families for years? I mean, what's the average duration? Do we know that?
So, of course, every situation is different. We've certainly learned with asylum seekers and refugees that flexibility is the key. What we ask for is a commitment from a host family of 3 months. There have been situations where it has lasted, I think the most that I'm aware of is 1.5 years, but generally people want to be on their own.
Mm-hmm. So what if we exclude it for the first year?
Well, I don't meet the guardrails that you described, but so far I'm not understanding the wealthy refugee that is in my home is wealthy and is going to get out of my home because they have money and they'll go get an apartment, and then we'll tax them the way we tax everybody. This is not exempting them when they're independent or any of that. So I'm not seeing the risk that I'm hearing you describe.
Well, I was just looking at the fiscal note that Julia provided. And she does have in there some assumptions about refugee home ownership. I was wondering if she could, I don't think Julia's walked us through the fiscal notes yet.
No, I don't think Julia has.
But I mean, that might be helpful to get an understanding of the cost of it, but I also don't feel like we need to put guardrails on it, because it seems to me like it's a pretty limited cases, and chances are it's not even going to apply to anybody. If it does, it would be only a few people for a few months.
Okay.
But
so Senator McDonald, before we hear from Julia.
If you earn $12,000 a year, regardless of who you are, and you live in with one family for 3 months, another family for 5 months, and another family for 4 months, do you apportion those $4,000, $3,000, and $5,000 to the different families for the homeowners accounting of household income?
You mean if you're a refugee or just
If
generally?
you're anybody.
I don't know when the trigger is. There's, if you live with somebody for a week, it doesn't count, but Abby can tell you.
12 months, $1,000 a month.
Well,
So that I'm actually flipping through the household income form, which, as you all know, is notoriously long and complex.
Maybe what you
Because of
want to
us.
avoid.
My understanding is that it is based on the amount of time, because it's the time that individual was in the household. So it would be prorated if you're changing residences often. Where this typically comes up as a challenging, confusing area for taxpayers is in the situation of roommates, where someone is perhaps only living in a household for a couple of months out of the year. At that point, they do have to, or a renter credit is often where that's an issue.
Forget the rent now, you just live there. 3 months,
So
5 months,
yes.
4 months.
Yes, then your income would be looked at for that period of time. That's what the additional member would be declaring as their income.
And how's that administered and enforced today?
Honor system.
Well, in the homestead declaration.
So if it's the renter credit, is the renter credit claim form, and if it's the homeowner who has a roommate, they do it on the household declaration form, which it's a two-sided form, multi-page. That's the household income declaration form, and it has a whole line for other person, and then you have these, I think, about 20 different lines for types of income. And each individual has to list what their types of income are and how much they contributed to the household. And as Madam Chair mentioned, the intent behind that is to look at how much income is available to the household to pay for the property taxes.
So, and then if it's someone that you've got staying with you for 4 months because their house burned, or a couple that's, whatever, that's what we do today.
That's correct. That is the law. That is how it's supposed to apply.
Well, that's what we're doing,
That's the proposal. We do the same thing for refugees.
Okay, so
So your questions and your temper seem to be at odds. So what's going on?
my temper.
Well, you're irritated, but you're asking questions.
you're making me jump.
Yeah,
in.
you're clearly hostile about this, but then your questions are sort of.
No, it has to do with Act 60 and property tax.
No,
He
it
always
just simply
gets
is,
it.
if I want to know what would currently happen if we didn't have the label of refugee on the people.
They would pay.
They would go to household income. They would.
Okay. So
Just
why
like a
don't we,
renter
we
or.
don't want to do this for refugees because they might be identified, or they
No,
might be.
because these people are out
They have
trying to get housing. The organizations that are placing refugees, they try and get freestanding houses, but we all know how available housing is in this state. And so they're out recruiting host families. This isn't your mother or somebody. You're out recruiting a host family to take in a totally unknown family from a different culture with different eating. But it's not, it
Why
is.
you got a family down the road and they're getting a divorce and you
No,
take
no.
one of them until they get it worked
No,
out.
no,
Yeah, same thing.
okay,
It's
but
not the same thing, Mark. These people are refugees. They've spent a year or more in a shanty town. They've got nothing. They're come on. It's not the same as a divorced family. It's not the same
They have
as
no
a neighborhood
resources.
family. Yeah.
they don't speak the language.
I don't know what the statute of limitations were, but we took someone in once for 4 months and probably didn't count their income.
It was before Act 60, so you were safe.
I think also that we're trying to not put barriers in front of families who want to help. and host refugees and asylum seekers in their home. And if they're worried that they're gonna have a property tax implication for it, they may not be as willing to open their home and welcome.
Well, it would be, if they were to be bumped out over the 90,000, I think that would be a bigger deal than an incremental thing, but that's just a big.
The people don't understand that.
That's
They just know, remember, we have this complex system. They just know that the household income could be affected.
Well, there are people that will go after someone with a Tesla that buys beer at the paychecks.
Okay, I know.
Pound them for goodness knows how long there, but that's,
We're getting, yes.
that's the world we live in.
Yes. Okay, Senator Brock.
Madam Chair, this is a simple issue. This is not a major issue. Like if we make a mistake with one person, it makes no real difference to the revenues of the state. And I would suggest that we move on.
Okay.
I agree.
We will put this up
Do you
for
want a
a vote.
motion?
No, we'll put
Okay.
it up for a vote next week. We're gonna let it, is this the tradition, hold over for at least 24 hours in case somebody wants to speak to us and just found out.
Randy, are we giving these guys $7,500 for moving here?
So Senator Brock
Yeah.
will confirm or deny
More
that
than
we
that.
worked this out, that I would behave hostily and he would come and speak as he
We do that all the
That's the
time.
voice of reason.
and resolve it, so.
Senator Cummings?
You're giving me the,
But Senator Brock just brought me down.
yes. He hasn't brought me down. He's not sitting next to me, vibrating hostility. Okay.
Senator Cummings?
Yes,
This is
babe.
Faith.
Yes.
You are about to hear from Julia Richter. Do you want to put that off
Yes,
as well?
We will hear from Julia, and then we are going to go over the yield bill and stay on property taxes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Julia, thank you for hanging in there with us.
Good afternoon, Julia Richter with the Joint Fiscal Office. There is a fiscal note about this bill, which is posted on the committee page under my name. Do you want me to share my screen or should I just quickly walk you through it?
What's it gonna cost?
So we estimate this bill will decrease education fund revenues by a maximum of $150,000 per year. So this represents a loss of less than 0.01% of all education fund revenues. And we expect this proposal to have a de minimis effect on tax rates. I'm happy to answer any questions or talk about the analysis if that would be of help to the committee.
Okay, I think at this point, short and sweet. Senator,
Julia, I'm curious, in your fiscal note research, there are people that think, our workforce challenges in Vermont, part of the solution is opening up the doors, and the governor has said, we want Ukrainian refugees, et cetera. Have you stumbled on any kind of data that sort of suggests this modest down in the ed fund would be made up, over a couple of years, if we assume this is a good way to attract folks who will then be permanent part of the workforce?
It's an interesting question. I did not look into that during this estimate.
I wonder if anyone tracked, because the last time we took large groups of refugees was mostly Bosnians during the Civil War there. And they came and they've been here 15, 20 years. It'd be interesting if somebody could track how they, did they stay in Vermont to start with? And, where are they now? Just to give us at least one example of how well they did.
If I may interject here, part of my analysis did include speaking with Tracy Dolan, who you just heard from at the State Refugee Office,
Yeah.
and doing some other research. And What I came across was that agencies are not required to track employment status of a refugee after the first year of coming to the United States. So this figure, for the purposes of our analysis, is unknown in the state of Vermont.
Yeah. No, I'm just thinking, I got my sociologist hat on. When we do this, it would be nice to kind of follow up with the last wave to see if they stayed or if it was just too cold here. And how well they did. It would be just good information. Okay, thank you. I think we'll put this up for a vote whenever we can squeeze it in next week. And we're gonna move on to age 737, which is the homestead property tax yields and the non-home property tax rates. So Abby, you're up again.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this bill is quite short this year. This sets the
Page.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, I missed that.
One page.
It is actually 2 pages. 1.5 pages.
Mine away, okay.
Still very short. Most of that is the statement of purpose, which just restates that it is setting the property dollar equivalent yield and the income dollar equivalent yield, which, as you know, are used to set the homestead property tax rates. And it also sets the non-homestead rate. So each year, the yields, and then this section that also includes a subdivision for the non-homestead rate, notwithstands current law, because current law does have a statutory non-homestead rate. This resets it. In this bill, what's actually adds to the length of this bill is a second section that sets aside a reserve within the education fund. It's somewhat modeled on the OPEB reserve that was done recently in the budget bill, or sorry, in the COVID relief bill last session. So this would set aside $36 million within the education fund for the purpose of funding universal school meal programs. And this would take effect on July 1st, so it would apply to the property tax rates going forward starting in July. And I don't know if there are any questions about the process or the language. This is pretty standard language. It's pretty much identical to what you see each fiscal year. Typically, it's not really in its own standalone bill. It's often in the miscellaneous tax bill or the budget bill or another revenue bill. But this year it's in its own standalone bill.
In its own, okay. So, Graham, first, any questions for Abby? Graham, have you got the little side-by-side sheet we see every year?
For the record, Graham Campbell from the Joint Fiscal Office. Julie and I worked on this bill together, and I'm going to let Julia walk through the education fund outlook briefly for you all, and I can answer questions.
Side by side, okay. All right.
Julia Richter, Joint Fiscal Office. Graham, feel free to interject here as you see fit. There should be an education fund outlook as well as the narrative fiscal note posted under my name on the committee page. Are you ready for me to start walking through that?
Yeah.
Okay. So as you just mentioned, Madam Chair, this document should look pretty similar to things that you've seen in previous years. Just as a short reminder, we've got in the far left column, this is saying what the numbers are referring to. And then we've got FY 2021 numbers, FY 2022 numbers, all of which should look quite familiar to you. And then in the far right column is FY 2023. And this is the Ed Fund balance sheet or outlook that reflects what you're seeing in the yield bill. So as you're well aware, in rows rows C, D, and E, this is what you're seeing in the yield bill. So the yield bill proposes that the uniform non-homestead property tax rate to be $1.449. the property yield per equalized pupil to be 13,472, and the income yield per equalized pupil to be 16,146. In calculating these yields and the uniform non-homestead property tax rate, there were a number of assumptions that we were asked to include. And these, I'll start with the ones that are highlighted in yellow, and you'll see that in the appropriation section, you'll see some yellow lines, and these are new assumptions that we've included in the yield model. The first one is H716, which is the miscellaneous education bill. And you see this in line 10A and line 11A because it's not changing the amount of money in the education fund outlook, but instead it's shifting where those dollars are going. So instead of the 6 million going out through the education payment, the 6 million is going out through special education aid. And lines 10 and 11 include those figures, but we've just added, only for visual sake, lines 10A and 11A, just so people can see that shift of funds. Next is line 14A, which is H703. This is an appropriation of one-time CTE construction and a rehabilitation learning program, which is has an appropriation of 15 million. Line 18A, this is referring to pensions. So S286 is the COLA and teacher contribution savings, which is subtracting 7.8. And Graham can speak more to this after I've walked through the outlook if people have more questions, but that's being taken away from line 18. It's the same thing where it's really just a visual breakdown of what's happening within the numbers. Line 19 is a new line referring to S286. So this is the ongoing normal cost of teachers OPEB for 15.1 million. And so that wraps up the assumptions that have been included in the appropriations. There's also been two more lines.
Julia, I've got a question.
Sure.
And I think Senator Pearson has one. Okay, no, there it is. The teacher's pension normal cost at 33. All right, last year it was at 37.6, and the year before it was at, so that's where that big jump is going. And now we're picking up an additional 15 above that 33, or does the 33 include the 15? One is, no, that's OPEB. Okay, so that's healthcare, and then the normal costs. So we are picking up an additional 15 million in this pension agreement. Is that cost to the ed fund? Is that right?
Madam Chair, I can take that question. The answer to that is yes. So line 18 is 33 million in fiscal year 23. That number would have been 40.8 million, but we're subtracting 7.8 million in savings, and that's due to the pension agreement where there are two parts that generate savings for the normal cost of teachers' pensions. The first is savings because the teachers will be contributing more to the normal cost through a higher contribution rate. And then the second is COLA adjustments that will lead to savings for the normal cost. So absent 286, the number for fiscal year 23 would have been 40.8, but we are saving $7.8 million because of that pension agreement. So basically the 7.8 that you see there is savings to the line above it. And so it would have been 40.8 otherwise. The second part of your question, line 19, is as you described. So it's in a new line item in the education fund, a new additional liability, and that is for the normal cost of teachers' OPEB payments.
All right, Senator Pearson, you have.
Yeah, I don't see anything, maybe I'm wrong, about the weighting, which I know doesn't impact next year's school spending, but I thought it impacted some of our startup and positions, and doesn't that come out of here, or is that all general fund?
People comes down.
It's general fund. I can answer that question, but go ahead, Julia, I don't want to.
Senator Hardy, feel free to jump in. I will say that what we have or have not included largely reflects certain bills that we're moving within the House. And some of the things that we have included were included in committee discussions in terms of what should be included when estimating the ed fund balance sheet. So nothing related to the waiting bill S287 has been included in the outlook that you're looking at right now.
Okay.
But does it have an impact on next year's ed fund?
It does not. The position, sorry, Julia, the positions are all general fund positions, and they're on the list in appropriations. And anything else that would impact would not start until FY24.
Okay, but the equalized pupil count.
If the equalized pupil count is down, it's not because of the waiting. It's
Okay,
because
so that will be impacted next year.
Private school?
There's declining enrollment all over the state, but also could be
But
private
do we have any sense of why we lost 1,000 kids from the projection? Not, it's 15 from the.
I am not aware off the top of my head. Our office doesn't calculate those projection numbers. So I would be happy to follow up with, I'm not sure exactly who calculated them. I would have to double check and get back to the committee about that.
We can get Brad in to talk to us.
My betting would be homeschooling during the pandemic.
It could be, but also because it's equalized pupils, it's also, it could be shift in the types of pupils. Yeah. And also just there's declining enrollment just across.
Right, but it's different from the projected. That's, that incorporates some of that.
But
okay,
definitely
not a JFO
related.
question.
Yeah.
If I could just jump in there really quick. If you're talking about projected, Senator Pearson, the projected there is fiscal year 22. I think it's generally understood that equalized pupil count in fiscal year 22 is pretty close to what we know, like on actual data. It's still projected though, because we haven't closed out fiscal year 22. We are in fiscal year 22 right now. So the number for pupil counts should be pretty close or pretty accurate. But like things like the consumption tax revenues aren't closed out yet. So we're still in a projected period. So the yields that you're in this bill are for fiscal year 23.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Graham, for that. And if I just may add one more thing, when speaking about projections, I was under the impression you were asking about changes since the December 1 letter or the e-board outlook. And I do want to just add that what's reflected here is there are some changes due to data updates as well as school budgets being voted in. So those are other changes that you may have noticed since earlier in the year.
Okay, and go ahead.
What's the big, what accounts for the $30 million drop in non-homestead property tax?
So that change is because there are a couple more assumptions we haven't had a chance to get to yet in the outlook, one of which is that $36 million is being applied to lowering tax rates. So when you look at lines A through E, and specifically line C, you can see that the uniform non-homestead property tax rate has declined in FY23, this proposal, as compared to previous years, which then corresponds with less money, less revenues coming from that tax rate.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm looking. The bill said they were putting 36 million aside for the school lunches. And we've gone from a $95.7 million surplus last year to 1.5 million. Which is quite a drop. And there's the 36. Okay, that's additional reserve.
Yeah, so that line 32 is similar to what was done last year with the additional reserve for OPEB that you'll see in line 31. And that's setting aside 36 million from the surplus and as earmarked for the universal school meals. So the reason that surplus has gone from the 95.7 down to the 1.5 is because as we walked through in the appropriations, there are some increases in appropriations in this ed fund outlook, as well as 36 million to lower tax rates, and then a further 36 million set aside in line 32.
Okay, but I see why it's set aside because we haven't decided on that. But my understanding is the bulk of this reserve was pretty much one time, the big bulk of spending we saw when the federal stimulus checks went out. And that 36 million will be an annual expense.
Yeah,
So
which will bump our, that's about exactly the amount we reduce taxes by.
Could I just comment, Madam
Yeah.
Chair, because I follow that issue closely, the universal meals. As I understand it, the floor debate in the House made clear that the presumption is this, nobody expects or wants this to be an ongoing obligation out of current funds.
Right.
But that any of the various ideas to how to more permanently fund this would take a year to get moving. And so this is sort of a, here we have this cash, we can keep it going. You know, we're in a universal meals world because of the feds. This would pay for it next year as we try to finish session with an ongoing source. So, you know, a bunch of presumptions baked in there, but that's, I understand the discussion that was on the House floor.
But then no ongoing source identified.
Not
yet.
Still got 2 months to go.
I've heard
We got
some.
1 month to go. Yeah.
I've heard some kicked around, and I've
Yeah.
heard the chair of our corresponding committee say,
Yeah.
you know what, this is getting funded out of the ed fund.
Right. Not in this. Yeah. This is a placeholder. So.
And we are still working on universal meals and.
Yeah.
What can
As I
we
understand,
afford to
House
do?
Ed is expected to vote it out, but that's only one committee.
Senate has only voted out breakfast, so.
Yeah.
Okay, Senator Hardy.
Well, I'm assuming we'll get Brad in to talk us through some of the education stuff, but.
We don't usually.
Oh, I would like to have Brad in.
Okay, but we need to know what you want, Brad.
Well, I would like to hear his explanation of the, drop in equalized pupils. I think I think I
That
know
may
why,
be,
but
that
it
would
be
be
helpful.
coming from the ed department.
And I would like to know, and maybe Julia or Graham knows this, or we could get Jim Demaray or somebody in the special education funding shift. What is in H716? Do either of you happen to know that?
Yeah, that's a bill that was passed out of Ways and Means. I'm not sure if it's passed out of the House yet. I would have to double check. And that is adjusting the special ed grants. I would need to, in the short term, I would need to look back in my notes. But I have prepared a fiscal note on that. I just didn't have it up at the moment.
That's okay. I mean, it hasn't come over here yet, so we're gonna not pass this out anytime soon, I would assume.
Oh, no,
because,
this is coming out. When?
Well,
Well, we said
soon.
2 weeks.
Yeah, I said anytime soon. There's still some things that need to be adjusted before it's too.
Yeah, no, we will definitely look at it. I don't know what H716 is. I know 4 years ago, special ed went to a block grant as opposed to it, yeah.
And it starts to roll it in,
We
but
put it off and put it off.
Yep.
And I was assuming this was, I thought this year we were actually gonna activate it.
Yeah, I know, I think that's one of the things that 716 does, but I don't know what the 6
So
million is.
Julia, have you?
Yeah, so if I
Right.
may, I just pulled up my fiscal note, so I'm happy to walk you through this. So under current law, supervisory unions census grants for fiscal year 2023 will be calculated using the average amount each received from the state for special education in fiscal years 2018 through 2020 and increased by the NIPA inflator. So under current law, total census block grants for fiscal year 2023 were estimated to be approximately 181.1 million. And this bill would change the 3 years that would be used to calculate the average amount of supervisory unions received census grants to 2019 through 2021 if it would result in a higher census grant for the supervisory union. If it would not result in a higher grant, the census grant would remain to be calculated using 2018 through 2020. This would result in an approximate total of 187.1 million for census grants, which is an approximate 6 million increase.
Okay.
And because school budgets have already been voted on, this is just shifting money within the education fund instead of an additional 6 million being put into the education fund in terms of appropriations.
Is this shift permanent or is it just for the first year?
Just for FY23.
Okay,
Okay.
it's just basically a hold harmless.
There's,
Okay.
and if I may, there is another part of the bill that has to do with a delay in the implementation of certain rules, which I do not know details about because they do not have a fiscal impact.
Okay.
Thank you,
All
Julia.
right, thank you. So we are looking at not quite a 20-cent tax decrease. But if we can't find a way to pay for meals, we'll have to increase it next year.
Yeah, I don't know if we want to back ourselves into this corner.
So the 20% tax decrease.
Decrease.
I'm sorry, decrease, right, 20 cents.
It's going from 153.8 to 136.9. The projected was 152.3. And we're going from 10.998 is the yield to 13.472.
Madam Chair, if I may I interject?
Yes.
So it's actually the middle column is FY22, which is the year that we're in right now. The numbers you were just referencing are FY21.
Okay, so 22 is projected, so that's 15.32. So we're going from 15.23 to 13.69. It's
That's
still
correct.
significant. We've never done a decrease like this before. It's really good. Okay.
Well, and how many people are paying, what's the percentage of households that are paying based on income these days?
Julia, are you still there?
I am. I'll need 1 minute to pull that number up for you, Senator McDonald.
As I remember it, I don't know, did the whole committee get it? 80% are eligible, but only 67% tax bills are large enough to get a rebate. That's what I remember. You CC'd me, I don't know if you CC'd the whole committee on that.
So I have it in front of me. I'm happy to send it to Faith to distribute to the committee. In fiscal year 22, 68.1% of all homesteads received property tax credit. That number includes people who technically don't pay on income because they get the $15,000 exemption. And it's important to note that we're talking about homeowning households and not people. So the number you're looking for is 68.1%. And in fiscal year 23, we estimate approximately 67% of homesteads will receive a property tax credit.
So I have a difficult time whenever we talk about the yield, trying to translate that into a property tax number, because so often we're dealing with apples and oranges. But on the 80%, it used to be that 80% of citizens, households, were able to pay their school taxes based on their household income. That was not written in statute. It's never been in statute. It was created by the $75,000 threshold. It was readjusted, as mentioned a couple times this year, to be $90,000 with a slope, which then recreated the 80%, which has never been in statute. And now the number of 68% is the current norm. That's what we have today. Is that basically correct?
Julia, I thought 80% were eligible, but their tax rate, their tax bills were too low to get a rebate or a payment.
Yeah, so the way that the property tax credit works is if a household property tax, the amount they would pay on property tax as compared to the amount they would pay on income tax, whichever is lower is what they're going to pay, right? So as it is currently, if their income is $90,000 or below, they can use the property tax adjustment on the first $400,000 worth of their homestead. If their if their income is above $90,000, then they can use the property tax adjustment on the first $225,000 of their home. And the way that that tax rates currently are, and the data that we have, around $137,000 of income is the break-even point in which it's never, it will never be lower for households above that income threshold for it to be cheaper for them to only pay, or where it will be cheaper for them to pay on income. So above 137,000, they're going to always be paying the property tax and not getting a property tax adjustment because they're too high to get a property tax adjustment.
Okay, but did I misunderstand your email? You said 80% of the households are eligible, meaning they're under that 137, but only 68% tax bills are high enough to benefit.
Correct. So I'm sorry. I should have been more clear in my email, which I
to understand Senator McDonald's questions, which may, some of us are more attuned.
So,
well, I'm happy to answer the questions, and we've been trying to provide the most helpful analysis.
if I may ask it another way.
Sure.
As the 80%, which in the past, when we've talked about 80%, there's never been a reference to it. But when you calculate an eligibility of the such and such, that has never been part of the discussion. The 80% is now at 68%. When we apply the many millions of dollars that are going to reduce the tax rate, that money goes to the people who don't pay based on income. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question.
So the tax rate.
I was just going to suggest that maybe Julia could do a memo for us on this issue, and then we could. We feel like we're having the same conversation over and over again. And I know it's frustrating for you.
Anyway, any suggestions?
What is it that you want?
We have a bunch of money to apply to homeowners to reduce their taxes is to whom is the money going? And if we restored the 68% back up to 80, what would the difference be in to whom the money went? Because we have not addressed that, what's the consequence on who gets this year's surplus and the following of the years that there?
Well, there's not gonna be any following years.
Or who gets?
Okay, but if I'm paying based on income, it's not a minimum amount I pay. I can't pay any more than is it 7% of my income, right? So if you reduce my tax rate, my tax bill is gonna go down. If it goes down to 6% of my income, then I'm benefiting. If it goes down to 6.5%, I will get a rebate. If I'm very low income, no, I'm not.
So we don't deal with the people
Okay.
on the
But if I'm,
rebate program.
yeah, but if, everybody's tax bill is gonna go down if we reduce the tax rate that much. So if I'm now at 7.5%, and this reduces it 0.5%, I think we're gonna have to run this in a table for you.
But that would be terrific, and we run a table for every.
Well, I don't know that we can, I don't know that the ability is there to run the table, but we can try it. We can ask.
So if I may try to clarify in one sentence, and I don't know if this is helpful in your discussion, but so the 68% of households receive a property tax adjustment. And the ones who do not receive a property tax adjustment do not, for let's say 3 reasons that we can use for discussion purposes. Their property tax is less than their income payment would be, is one reason. Another reason is their income is so high that they are always ineligible. Or the third reason is that they didn't fill out the paperwork properly. So those are the 3, when we talk about the 80% eligible, but 68% are only receiving a property tax credit. The 68%, the reason that there are some who are eligible who might not be receiving that property tax credit is for those 3 reasons.
Julie has been working on this
Yes.
for several weeks, and I don't have any criticism with. He's trying as hard as he can. I have not been able to ask the question in a way that has.
Are you trying to hope? Are you hoping that when we reduce the school taxes for people, we don't omit or we don't extend pieces of that to the income sensitized?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's what I'm.
Yes.
Yes.
And are you also hoping that more people qualify for the income? So do you want to raise the income cap so that more people qualify for it?
The income tax that you pay as a homeowner for schools is the 2% of your household income plus the local share runs at, was it close to 2.5%?
Yeah, it's on the.
And when people earn more and more income, but the income cap doesn't change, then when you have more money going into the fund, it keeps going up to people that are above the cap, and it doesn't go to people who are below the cap.
Well, if you look at the education fund outlook, both the property tax rate and the income tax rate essentially drop.
Yes. But it's the property tax rate is based on the value of your property. And the income tax rate is based on your income. And if they don't go, if one goes up faster than the other, then you've got a shift.
So when we solve the yield model, so when we apply these assumptions, unless the legislators who we're working with ask us to do otherwise, the general assumption that we always follow is that there's a uniform change in the average tax bill across those three classes.
Yeah.
So the income, the average homestead property, and the uniform non-homestead, all in our model, all change in accordance with each other. So they increase by the same percentage or they decrease by the same percentage. And that's
Yes.
reflected in the EdFed outlook here.
I'll do one more thing, Madam Chair, then I will
Yes.
let us all sleep.
I think you're keeping most of us away.
Julia has recognized in a couple of emails, this is a self-leveling formula.
Yes.
And when you put so much money in, it filters out and it self-adjusts to how much you put in. You put in more money,
Yes.
people's tax rates go down. When you put in less money, people's tax rates go up. But what is not self-leveling is the threshold of household income. That is fixed. And when that thing doesn't move, the self-leveling stuff pushes the money up the scale and takes it away from the 80% of the people who we sometimes refer to as working people or retirees. That one requires the legislature to change, and we haven't changed that since the last time.
That's what I just asked you, Mark. I asked you if you wanted to increase that income level. That's what I asked you just now.
I've been from the beginning of the year saying we gotta move that income level.
Right,
Okay.
so if that's
Okay,
what you
this
want
is-
to do, then.
Now we're
And
hearing
I don't know how to make it come
Okay.
out to what it would be
But Mark,
if it been done.
that's what you go and you sit down and you talk to Julia and Graham about and say, what would it take in the way of changing that income level to equal, and it should flow with as the average income goes up, I would think. What would it take to do that and what would it cost? And then you get a drafter to draft it and then we can look at it as an amendment.
Julia's done one where I believe, and Julia will correct me, that
But
you simply move the value up to around $400,000 on which you can take it, and you change the slope, or you can move the $90,000 up, or you can do a little of each.
okay, but Senator, it needs to come to this committee in a written form as an amendment proposed, I assume by you, so we can talk about adding it to this bill.
Okay,
Okay, then we know what we're talking about.
okay.
Okay, so you need to get a drafter, probably Abby.
Abby, did you hear all this?
Abby's probably left us. And sit down with joint fiscal, get the number, and it should be a fairly straightforward adjustment. And we used to have this fight every year. The Senate is always trying to raise both the household and the income level. We were the ones that got it to 90 at one point.
Over
Yeah.
two deep recessions ago, and it's now.
And so the first question is, are we off track? Have incomes gone up? What's the slope on incomes? And then where do you adjust that 90?
So
Okay.
may I interject, Madam Chair?
Yes.
So we estimate that changing the current credit calculation, so all household incomes may use the property tax adjustment, and it's no longer that 90,000 cap. So that all household income levels may use the property adjustment on the first $400,000 of the house site value would lead to approximately 80% of homeowners receiving property tax adjustments. So in other words, by making households with total incomes over 90,000 eligible to use the property tax adjustment on the first 400,000 of the house site value, about 80% of Vermonters would receive property tax adjustments. And with this change, households with incomes over 245,000 would never qualify for a property tax adjustment. And there's a number of assumptions of the analysis I'm happy to go into, but following these assumptions, we estimate this change would cost approximately $25 million. So I don't know if that helps answer the question.
We could do that and still lower the property tax rate.
Well, it'd be the same number of dollars.
Yes, but we could still take
different
it down,
demographic
so, all right,
group.
let's see if you can get that drafted. And
Or-
I'm
or-
thinking here that what we will probably do is add, if we decide to go along with you, we can add it to miscellaneous tax and add the yield to the miscellaneous tax. Because we can't pass that out till we decide what we're doing with this.
I asked Abby that, what Julia's done, which, thank you for doing it, is come up, reached 80% by moving the value up to the first 400,000. And we spoke earlier this week or whatever, to ask that rather than simply go up to 400,000, try a number that was 350 or 300 or both, and then say, in order to go to those numbers, you would have to move the 90,000 somewhere else to make it come out to 80%.
So
We should see what the range is and be able
All
to
right, so,
not just have a go-no on one number, but look at the range.
okay, so see what you can work out and bring it into us.
Can you do a table for this, Julia? I mean, the drafting is pretty easy, it's just changing a few numbers, I
Yeah.
think, but
It's more what the numbers do.
Sure. So just to be clear, the table would be,
well, where are we at currently with each of these items? And then what is the proposal and how much?
Different options. We could raise the housing to 400, which the people that haven't tried to buy a house recently might seem extremely high, since that was pretty much a mansion 5 years ago. We could raise the income level, and 90 does sound fairly low for a household. We could raise the income level, or we could do a combination. We could
Okay.
raise the housing to 300 and the income level to 95 or 100, whatever.
okay.
A range
So we have a range.
with 4 or 5 choices, all of which were generally the 80%, that would be an excellent place to start.
Okay.
Appreciate the opinions. Okay.
Yeah, so the table is more valuable than the language.
Then the
I think.
language, the language is language we can probably do in 4 or 5.
Can we be done, Mom?
Yes, we're done. It wasn't Mom that was holding this up.
Thank you, Madam.
Uncle.
It's Uncle Mark, please stop.
Okay.
No, but you know what? I know you
We
get
can
frustrated
go
trying to get
on.
it out.
We are